Professor Nowak, Israel is the only country in the world that prosecutes children in military courts. What do you think about this?
In general, military courts should only be used to try members of the armed forces, because in general, the standards of due process and fair trial are much lower in military than in civilian courts. But children in particular need to have special child justice systems, and they never exist in military courts. So that's why children should never be tried before military courts. And even Somalia recently stopped this practice.
Almost all children in military court systems are kept in pretrial detention. How does this affect the fair trial guarantees enshrined in international law?
Again, international law says that pretrial detention should be an exception and should be kept to the shortest possible period of time. And in addition, children should in principle never be put in pretrial detention. Now, a study of UNICEF of 2013 that covered the 10 years between 2003 and 2013 found out that an estimated number of 7,000 children have been arrested, detained in military detention and tried before military courts within those 10 years. That means, on average, 700 children per year. That means 2 children per day are arrested and detained in pretrial detention in military facilities. This is absolutely a violation of international human rights and children's rights.
Israeli security agency uses solitary confinement as interrogation method for Palestinian children. What are international laws and rights violated by the practice of solitary confinement?
My successor as UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Juan Mendes, in a report of 2011, clearly stated that solitary confinement having very severe detrimental effect on the mental and physical health of prisoners should never exceed 2 weeks. And in addition, it should never be applied to children or to persons with disabilities. And this opinion, which is based on medical evidence, was also confirmed by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. So it means that children should never be put in solitary confinement, because evidence shows that they have all kind of long-term effects, like hallucinations, sometimes even that leads to suicide. They have post-traumatic stress disorders, and that seriously affects their mental health.
In your opinion, what is the impact of threats, such as imposing long imprisonment periods, using harsher methods of interrogation, or even threats of arresting other family members, on the detained or arrested children?
I mean, Israeli security and military forces are applying, and that is well documented by international monitoring bodies, all kind of psychological pressure that can be considered as psychological torture, similar to what the United States have been practiced in the so-called war on terror. That means, for instance, that they are put in stress positions, they are tied to chairs, which really creates a strong pain. They are put in isolation, in solitary confinement. They have no access to their families. Families or lawyers are not present during their interrogation. The whole idea is to put so much pressure on those children that they finally confess to the crimes that they are suspected of having committed.
Israel was reviewed at the CRC session that was held in 2002. The committee expressed its serious concerns at allegations and complaints of inhuman or degrading practices and of torture and ill treatment of Palestinian children by police officers during arrest and interrogation in places of detention. Therefore, the committee strongly recommended that the state party to investigate effectively all cases of torture and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment by police officers or other government officials and bring the perpetrators to justice. In your opinion, what are the ways to make sure Israel does investigate these cases and it does hold the perpetrators accountable?
It is a general rule of international law that torture is absolutely prohibited. Secondly, every single act of torture needs to be investigated by independent state authorities with the aim of bringing the perpetrators to justice. There is plenty of evidence by the Committee on the Rights of the Child, by many others, most recently by a report of Defense for Children International that was released in 2020, that the practice of ill-treating and torturing children in military detention in Israel has not stopped. So in other words, the recommendations of the Committee on the Rights of the Child didn't have any kind of practical effect. That's why it is very, very difficult to say what would need to be done in order to convince Israeli authorities to actually comply with their international obligations. That means, in the first place, not to detain children. Secondly, if they detain children, not to interrogate them under conditions that might amount to torture, cruel or inhuman treatment. And certainly, if this happened, to investigate all those cases. In fact, this is not illegal, it's a political question. As long as the United States of America is strongly supporting the human rights practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territories, as long nothing will change. So I have a certain hope that with the recent election of Joe Biden as the new president of the United States, the policy of the United States towards Israel might change and a stronger pressure might be put on Israel, first of all, to find a lasting solution to the Palestinian question, the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, and secondly, to stop these inhuman practices by the Israeli military and security authorities. And let me add that in 2019, I submitted the United Nations Global Study on Children Deprived of Liberty to the United Nations General Assembly. And in this study, we distinguish different settings of deprivation of liberty of children. Of course, in the administration of justice, children living with their parents, usually mothers, in prison, migration-related detention, children living in all kinds of institutions, for children with disabilities, in orphanages, for children that use drugs or alcohol, or for other reasons need to be in enclosed institutions. But also 2 chapters on children deprived of liberty for national security reasons and in the context of armed conflicts. And in these 2 final chapters, we of course also looked into the situation of children deprived of liberty by Israeli military and security forces. And we found out that this situation again is violating international standards of human rights, which are applicable to Israel as the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and many other prominent international monitoring bodies have repeatedly established. So it means that the standards of deprivation of liberty also in the Convention on the Rights of the Child are applicable, fully applicable to Israel. Article 37 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child clearly spells out that deprivation of liberty of children shall only be a measure of last resort. That means if there are no non-custodial alternatives possible, and if absolutely necessary, only for the shortest appropriate period of time. Now, in the case of children deprived of liberty in Israel, we are usually talking about young children between the age of 12 and 17, usually boys, throwing stones at tanks of Israel. This is not a very serious crime. So for these kind of offenses, even if they are violating the military code of Israel, still the principle of measure of last resort applies. They should not be put in police custody. They should not be put in pretrial detention. And in principle, they should also not be convicted of such minor crimes that have to do with the general situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. So our recommendations to all countries, all member states of the United Nations, but also to Israel in this particular situation are very, very clear. Release these children, do not detain them again, and to find other ways and means of dealing with Palestinian children who are desperate about the situation of living in occupied Palestinian territories. So in the long run, the only solution is to find a peaceful way of Israelis and Palestinians living together in the State of Israel. Thank you very much.